Thank you, Lance. Very much appreciate that kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today. I promise I will do my best to get you out of here early enough to enjoy the rest of your day, being the last one. So my name is Alex Hanway. I work for Thales, and I'm the business development manager responsible for all of our database and big data partnerships. And so today I'd like to share with you a little bit how we secure Neo4j graph databases, and specifically how some of our customers are using this to address their security and their compliance needs. A little bit about Thales. So we are not necessarily a household name, but our products are everywhere. They touch your everyday lives. We're actually an 80,000 person company that spans the globe. In fact, I often say that we're an interstellar company because we actually have products circling the globe in space. And so you use this every day, whether it's the payment cards in your wallet, to the transportation systems that you take to get to work, or even the airplanes that you take to go on vacation. Thales has some component in all of those places to keep your journey, your information, your data safe. Specifically, the part of Thales that we work for is the Cloud Protection and Licensing Unit. You might be familiar with names such as Gemalto, Vormetric, SafeNet. These are all companies that through various acquisitions are now part of the Thales group. And what we offer for customers in this space are really data protection solutions, solutions to secure identity and access management, and also solutions to secure digital rights management. So if you think about software licenses and how you enforce those are really the things that we bring to bear to market. Really, when we address our customer problems or help our customers with their problems, they're really around these notions of securing data and sensitive identities so that enterprises, organizations can proceed with their operations in a way where they don't have to worry about these elements. They can just go about their regular business and focus on the goals that really matter to the bottom line. For a lot of our customers, this really comes back to securing their databases. If you think about sensitive data, whether it's our identity numbers, our bank information, payment information, all of this stuff eventually finds itself to a database, specifically databases like Neo4j. And as we see in the news about how much data we're generating on a daily basis and the volumes that we deal with now compared to only a few years ago, we realized that these are really important challenges that our customers face. Specifically, customers are worried about data breaches, right? I mean, we see these headlines on a weekly basis about certain companies being hacked for credit card numbers or healthcare records, et cetera. And so this is really a fundamental challenge that our customers face when adopting a database. How do I keep all of this information safe? Because by nature, a database is a central repository for all of this information. And so especially if you think about something like Neo4j, where you have this data and you're also keeping all of the relations that data has throughout the enterprise, that's really an attractive target for nefarious evildoers out there, right? And so really customers look for solutions like ours to address these challenges so that they can move on with their daily business. That said, not everything that organizations worry about are external to the enterprise, right? If you think about any organization, there are people within it that have specific privileges that allow them access to very sensitive information. And in the IT space, we're talking about people with root user access. These could be people who are responsible for the storage network. It could even be people responsible for the databases themselves. So how do you keep data safe, both from people outside the organization, but also people inside the organization, right? These are things that companies really need to think about as they adopt databases in general, writ large, but specifically also for Neo4j. And all of this really fits along the backdrop of compliance. I mean, right next to every headline we see around data breaches, we see a corresponding headline to the reaction. And this is governments at every level, from local municipalities, states, national governments, depending on your locale, really implementing new laws that are focused around data privacy and data security. And with each new law that comes into effect, we're finding that they're becoming more and more specific about the types of security and really the measures that people need to take to keep all of this information safe. So how do you tackle these security questions against the backdrop of all of these requirements that you also have to address at the same time? And what complicates this challenge even further is the migration to the cloud, because we're finding from customers, and we're hearing that people aren't adopting one cloud for all of their IT needs, right? For a variety of reasons, whether it's the area of expertise or specificities about a certain cloud versus a desire maybe not to be locked into a specific vendor. How do customers now manage all of these risks, and when really their deployments aren't consolidated in one place, and really they're spread between different clouds, all of which are being managed remotely by third parties, right? So these challenges interlock, and they're really an obstacle to maximizing what you can get out of a database, and especially when we think about the complexity that customers face in their database environments and how they want to simplify that by using Neo4j. That really extends also to how do I simplify that from a security perspective as well. And so that's why we're excited to work with Neo4j on really addressing security in the database market, and because each of us in our own way allow customers to really streamline what they're trying to achieve from a business perspective and also a security perspective to really maximize what they're getting out of their investments. And so what we bring to the table is a solution called CipherTrust Transparent Encryption, CTE for short. And this is a file system level encryption solution that's really elegant in its simplicity. So effectively, this is an agent that sits on the file server, and that agent will define which directories and pathways will receive encrypted data. So every time the database writes into that directory or reads from that directory, the agent will either encrypt or decrypt that data, making it readable for the database, and then by proxy, all of the applications that are using the data from that database. And so it's transparent because the database and the application will operate just as they would normally, without having to have any architecture changes, any changes to the application code. Basically, these sit above the file system, and they don't really have to worry about the agent being there. This agent corresponds and communicates with a separate server that you can deploy in any environment that you control. This could be either as a virtual machine or as a physical appliance, and that separate servers are key manager. This is the repository where all of the encryption keys are stored, and really where the customer has fine-grained access over how data is accessed through that agent. Okay, so at a high level, this is sort of what we bring to the table and supporting the Neo4j use case for customers. Digging down an extra level, why this is really relevant to how you're using graph databases and really addressing the challenges that you face from a security perspective, is that first, this starts ticking the boxes when you really start talking about compliance, right? When you start talking about security, when you start talking about data privacy, as compliance mandates articulate needs for encryption, using something like CipherTrust Transparent Encryption allows you to ticking those boxes, so you don't really have to worry about keeping up to date with the latest regulation, whether or not that's GDPR or most recently the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Right? As regulations, whether it's either of those or say PCI DSS, as they start getting more prescriptive, you have this already taken care of to start. Digging a little further into that, and this will also relate to compliance here in a moment, is the ability to define access based on policies, right? So if you think about what encryption does and how an organization operates, encryption is sort of binary, right? You either have the key to read the data or not. How do you then go from there to being able to parse out who within an organization can continue to meet their professional responsibilities while still maintaining minimal access to sensitive data, right? And this is where access controls become really an important feature in what we offer here and what customers are looking for. So using our key manager, an organization can define the policies that will determine who has access to data. So as an example, you could conceivably allow a security administrator access to all of the encryption keys that correspond to a specific database while never giving them access to the database itself. Correspondingly, say someone who's responsible for storage architecture could have access to the database and the underlying storage without ever having access to the encryption keys that would render all of the data that they have access to into a readable format, right? So in that level, you're starting to separate duties between different parts of the organization so that everyone can fulfill their professional responsibilities to the best of their ability without ever really posing a risk to the organization or the sensitive data that you hold. These policies can be so sort of detailed that it would allow, say, a storage administrator to back up this data without being able to do anything else. You could define certain applications or processes as having read-only access or write-only access. And so it really allows you to really narrow the field as to who has access to the sensitive data, and really makes it more feasible to use something like a graph database more broadly across an organization. What's exciting here is that because it is transparent to both the database and the application, you can extend the use of your current investments in Neo4j without having to worry about changing your security, right? So what I mean by that is, because the agent can be installed after the fact, you already have your investment set up. You can install the agent, and all of your query language that you're already using will still work, right? Because we don't touch that, that architecture sits in place. And so if you're happy with what you're doing and you just want to start feeding more data that maybe previously you couldn't because of security concerns, if you want to start feeding that data into the database, start really building those connections and really leveraging what you're trying to get out of your graph system, CipherTrust transparent encryption will sit there underneath and do everything it needs to do without you having to worry about it. So really, again, makes this a streamlined approach to securing your enterprise. For those of you that maybe operate in more highly regulated spaces, the corresponding key manager does come in a FIPS 140-2 level 3 option. So what this means is that it's a tamper-proof hardware appliance that, again, would sit in your own data center, right? And so by virtue of that, you can, again, circling back to your compliance obligations, start ticking those boxes off, especially when we're talking about things like PCI DSS. And lastly, what really is sort of beneficial in this approach to bring security is that, given the privileged position of the agent at the file system, and the fact that all of the sensitive data that you're encrypted is communicating through this agent in some capacity, that agent is actually recording all of those transactions. And similarly, on the key manager, that key manager is recording all of the policy changes that you're making. So in the end, you have these sets of logs that are providing you a tremendous amount of information that gives you visibility into how your organization is using this data, who is interested in this data, and correspondingly who's interested in the policies. And all of this can be fed into other monitoring tools that you may have in the enterprise. So from a security perspective, this is great because you're getting greater visibility over everything that you care about. And from a compliance perspective, it's even better because then all of a sudden you have all of this information that you can present that helps you demonstrate control of your data. So whether your requirements are prescriptive, something like PCI DSS that gets very detailed in the types of encryption that you must implement, or the level of security for your key manager, something like FIPS, you have this information. But for say regulations that are less prescriptive, that are broader, say GDPR, where really all it's pushing you to do is demonstrate control of your data, these logs allow you to do that as well, because they show that you and only you have had access to this data and the keys that control access to that data. Right. So this is really, from a security perspective, what helps unlock a lot of value for customers who are trying to use something like Neo4j. Now, I've described all of this in abstract. What does this actually look like in the real world? So we do have a joint customer who is currently using this in production. This is a large financial institution. It's actually one of the top 10 largest banks in the world. And they were looking to invest in Neo4j. If you could imagine the amount of data that this company has, there are all sorts of relationships with that data that make that information highly valuable for the organization as a whole. And so they were really excited about using a graph database and starting to unlock all of these different relationships that maybe previously they were having a hard time really identifying and leveraging. But the problem is they operate in a highly regulated space. And if you think about the data that they're collecting as well, this is all super sensitive information. I mean, this is trading information, customer information, stuff that you certainly don't want to have out there in the world. And so, being that they're conservative by nature, they were looking to secure their data before they started making investments into the database. But on top of this, if you can, considering they're one of the top 10 largest banks in the world, they have a lot to manage. And so they didn't want to add to the complexity that they already face from a security perspective. And so that's why they gave Thales a call. They called us for our file encryption solution and our key manager, because the two go together. And this actually really unlocked a lot of the possibilities that they were hoping to take advantage of in deploying Neo4j. So the first is that they were able to successfully deploy this and move into production. And so right now they're using a variety of applications that are pulling data from their graph database. And if you can think about the types of applications that they're using, they're pretty disparate, right? So everything from anti-money laundering applications to anti-fraud applications to proprietary trading applications are all pulling data from this database. And because they were able to make this migration, they've been able to feed more data into their existing investments while still maintaining all of the relationships, right? So from a streamlined perspective, they're consolidating data, they're getting more out of it, and they're not really having to expend extra energy trying to manage all of this. So it really streamlined a lot of their business operations, at least with respect to some of these applications. From a security perspective, this really helped them streamline as well, because they were already using the underlying key manager. Rather than having to deploy an extra point solution to secure this use case to then take advantage of the database, they were able to just add an agent and a couple licenses, and they were done. So from a security perspective, they're managing Neo4j in the same way that they would manage their file servers and their applications, all from the same underlying platform. And so they've been so successful with this approach that they're actually looking to expand their use case and to start adding other applications to pull from their graph data and actually try to feed more data into their database to really expand their use. So from the abstract to the real world, we're finding that this is actually a really exciting story, and one that's paying dividends. It's a place that's very focused on actual dividends. So sort of to take a step back and to sort of recap sort of at a high level why this is such a compelling story and why we feel there's a lot of value in a partnership here for the database community. First, from a security perspective, when using Neo4j, using something like CipherTrust encryption returns control to you, the data owner, right? You don't have to worry about people outside your organizations trying to hack your data. By setting up policies, you don't even have to necessarily worry about people within your organization that have privileges getting access to this data. You can parse control based on who needs what, when they need it, and not have to worry about looking over someone's shoulder or wondering about what's waiting in the wings. And you can do this because all of this information is being recorded, and you have the visibility right there to see exactly who is interested in data, who presents a threat, who doesn't present a threat, and really focus your time, attention, and energy on all the things that really matter and make a difference to the bottom line. From a compliance perspective, that security rolls right into it. If you take care of the security, then compliance really just becomes an exercise in proving that what you're doing works, right? You don't really have to worry about falling short or missing gaps. And that begins for those, especially in the highly regulated spaces, with FIPS validated key management, right? Having that physical appliance that you control in your own place really allows you to trust the integrity of all the data that's being secured by your encryption. And especially, to take a step back and present this in the context of the cloud, if we're thinking about the complexity of being in multiple clouds, having control of your own encryption keys when your data is sitting in someone else's data center is really a tremendous advantage in demonstrating your regulatory compliance, because you and only you have control of your encryption keys. And by definition, in that case, only you have control over your data, irrespective of where it sits. And if the cloud if the cloud provider does get a subpoena, a lawful subpoena for your data, that no cloud provider is actually going to turn that over in a readable format, right? At the end of the day, those requests have to come to you, and you'll always be in control and in the know of what's actually happening to your data. And then last is scalability, right? The fact that this operates at the file system level, doesn't interfere with the database or the application, really allows you to focus on scaling your operations for the cloud, scaling your operations for the vast quantities of data that we're pulling in, whether they be from connected devices or greater application uses. I mean, all the things that are driving data growth these days, you can focus on those things, knowing that underneath, the agent is taking care of all the security and is keeping up with the demands. Performance impacts are negligible from an encryption perspective, and from a user experience perspective, that impact is non-existent because it's transparent. You don't see any change in behavior for the end user, which is really exciting, especially for organizations that are external facing to the public. And so when we start thinking about large data sets for the cloud, whether you're looking to expand on-premise, it really doesn't matter. You can mix and match your use cases and your requirements. At the end of the day, this level of encryption will allow you to adopt graph databases in that way, in a way that's both secure and compliant. So it's, this is why we're excited about the partnership and why we're excited to offer this solution to customers that are really looking to really take advantage of all the opportunities that graph databases bring to the market. If you would like more information, because I know what I presented here was pretty high level, we have more information available on the Neo4j website. We have a partner page with a few articles and some contact details. And then you can also visit us at Thales CPL, where we have more information on how to secure your information using either encryption, key management, or identity and access management solutions. And I know we do have a few questions already in the chat window, it looks like. But if there's anything that you do want more help on, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer a question or connect you with someone who can get you technical details to answer your questions. So thank you for your time. And I guess now maybe we can take an opportunity to get to the questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. What a great presentation to wrap up our day with. That was excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So we have had a ton of questions that have come in, and I want to remind the audience that if they'd like to submit a question, they can do so by typing it into the questions tab located at the top of their screen. If we don't get to all the questions, someone from Neo4j will follow up with you, or you can send an email to webinar@neo4j.com and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. But as Alex pointed out, there have been several questions, and there's a bunch about encryption. So I think I'm going to start with those. Okay. So here's one that asks, is it possible to move data once it's encrypted?
Yes, that's a good question. And that's one we get pretty regularly. So you can think of it as long as that agent can communicate with the key management server, you can decrypt that data. You can encrypt or decrypt that data. So let's say that you are currently deployed in one cloud and you want to move to another cloud for whatever reason. You don't have to necessarily worry about decrypting all of that data, moving it, and then re-encrypting it. You could just move that data over. And as long as that agent has a pathway to communicate back to the key management server for the appropriate encryption key, you can just pull that key and then go on with your day. Right? You pull that key, encrypt the data, decrypt the data, do whatever you need, and you'll still have access to it. So from a practical standpoint, it's a very convenient way to secure your data, and keeps you in control. So again, you're not locked into any specific vendor. Just tries to make it easy for you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And speaking of moving clouds, here's a question that asks, which clouds do you work in?
So we work in all of them. If you could think of it as, I like to say it's, we operate in the clouds much the same way as we would operate on premises. So as long as you have access to the operating system, you have the ability to install our agent and work, right? So it doesn't matter if you're deployed in AWS, Google, Azure, Oracle, IBM. If you're in infrastructure as a service, you have access to the underlying infrastructure, the file system level, the file server. You can use our solutions. So wherever you're looking to install Neo4j, or wherever you're currently using Neo4j, if you have access to that layer, you have the ability to secure that data with CipherTrust transparent encryption.
Great, thank you. It's good to know. So here's one that asks about performance. So what does encryption do to their performance?
Great question. And I didn't go too much into it. I think I just mentioned it a little bit at the end. So, and we get this question pretty regularly. So naturally, there's the caveat. It depends on your architecture and your environment. But for the most part, it's pretty minimal. I want to say that when we test, it's somewhere between 3 and 9% performance degradation. Again, there are a number of factors and variables that go into this, and I don't pretend that I'm technical enough to go into all of those here. But if you have more questions, I'm happy to connect you with people who can give you those details. But generally, we say between 3 and 9%. So it's not minuscule, but it's generally not something that poses a problem for customers, and certainly nothing that would prevent someone from using this in production.
Great, thank you. And then I'm kind of cruising through these questions. Looks like we have time for about one more.
Okay.
So let's wrap with. Okay, you mentioned the importance of controlling encryption keys for data in the cloud. Could you go into a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah. So, yeah, because I only really mentioned that at the end. This is as a few layers, right? So the first is from a compliance perspective, especially for those regulations like GDPR that are sort of broader in how they define the requirement, where really it focuses on having data control. right? How do you demonstrate control of your data when it's sitting in someone else's data center? Because fundamentally, that's the cloud, right? That's someone else's data center that's offering access as a service through virtualization. And so from a compliance perspective, like what's the mechanism for that? Well, one way to do that is to encrypt your data, put it in the cloud in their data center, and have access to or have control of your encryption keys locally. So by doing that, you can demonstrate that you have control of your data because no one else has access to the encryption keys, right? That's the most basic level. As we start sort of developing the sort of the cloud conversation, one of the things that's a very real practice is that law enforcement, and that's not unique to any one country. I mean, this is a global phenomenon. Will subpoena information from cloud service providers, and cloud service providers put this information. They make this available, so you can Google your preferred cloud service provider, and ask Google about lawful subpoena releases, and then insert cloud service provider, and they will list all of the subpoenas that they have received that was asking them to turn over ostensibly your data, right? And so from a customer perspective, like how do you know that data is in clear text or secured? So if you encrypt that data and you keep the keys yourself, that allows you to know that, okay, the cloud service provider may have turned over this data because they were legally required to, but that data in the end was in ciphertext. It wasn't readable, right? So at the end of the day, if someone wants access to your organization's data, they have to present the subpoena to you. And at that point, you're part of the conversation, right? When this isn't, I'm not trying to position this as a way to subvert law enforcement or get away with duplicitous activities. It's really just about being aware and being in control and just having a seat at the table. And so owning your encryption keys do that, because again, it puts you in control. And so nothing happens or gets decided without you saying yes or no, or having a say so, at least in that conversation. So excellent question, and definitely very topical. That's been in the news lately. So excellent. Thank you.
That was super interesting. I wish we could have a whole session just kind of digging down into that. But having said that, I want to thank you, Alex, for your time today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Marilee.
And for those of you in our audience, thank you for tuning in today. I want to let you know that our next Connections, Graphs in Government will be taking place in April, the end of April. So we hope to see you there. And with that, I'm going to bid everyone a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.